Hey friends, this is Natalie Irvin, and welcome to the ICU podcast, where we explore how we can find significance in the unseen work of leaders and learn to be intentional to truly see others in our everyday lives. I can't wait to share with you, so let's get started. Today's scripture is Psalm 139, 7 through 10. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. Hey friends, welcome back to the ICU podcast. I'm so excited because today I'm interviewing a dear friend of mine, Kain Weaver. Kain is a psychiatrist. He's a brain injury advocate. He's a stroke survivor, an exercise enthusiast, and a Swiftie, most importantly. Kain and I have known each other since our time at Georgia Southern University, and he and I served on the SOAR team together, which was part of our orientation at Georgia Southern, and it was a really great time where we spent lots of time together, got to know each other really well. And he just became a really special part of my life. We recently got to reconnect at our friend Emily's wedding, and I knew that he would be the perfect guest because he's been through a lot and persevered through a lot, and I'm just excited for him to share his story. And I'm just happy that you're sitting here right now. So that in and of itself is a miracle. And so thank you for coming on. I'm honored to be able to let you share your story here on this platform for our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was super excited that you even asked. It is definitely really an honor to be able to even be here to have this conversation with you. And like you said, I've been through a lot in like the last 5 years. And so to be here, to be able to talk about it and to be doing as well as I am, it's really an honor. And I'm really happy and excited that we get to have this conversation.
Me too. So let's go back. Tell us where you're from and then a little bit about your time at Georgia Southern.
Okay, yeah. So I grew up in Ringgold, Georgia, which most people don't know. So I always said Chattanooga, Tennessee, but kind of moved around Georgia, lived in Savannah, Georgia for a while. And then, like you said, we went to college together at Georgia Southern University. And we were on a leadership team that my freshman year, I was a freshman whenever I met you. And we worked together on that leadership team. And that's really where all these opportunities with leadership and different activities I got involved with, kind of serving the community, serving the college, and kind of the work that we did launched and eventually landed me into med school and residency, which I just finished.
Wow. So I remember when you came in and we were interviewing you for the SOAR position, and we asked, a lot of random questions, but we also wanted to know, like, what's your major? What do you want to do? And you said pre-med. And I was like, oh, that's so cute. They all say that. And then they never make it. But you, put us all to shame because you sure did. And you had a really difficult road to get there. But you're there, and that's just so incredible. What made you want to go into that field?
I've kind of a nerd. I've always enjoyed science. And so there's that aspect of me. But I also wanted to do a job where I knew I was helping someone. And so to be able to take these skills of like thinking kind of critically in a scientific way, but then also making an impact on someone's life. Because like all through Georgia Southern, like I was always involved with volunteer activities. I went on some of the trips, like Give Kids the World. I've gone to Honduras and helped with medical missions there. And so medicine just kind of made sense. It's what made sense. It was really difficult, but I also enjoyed kind of the journey of getting through everything. I don't know how, even without having the stroke and everything else, I don't know how I got to this point because it was really hard and it was a really long journey. I was 18 years old whenever I decided in college, like I'm going to be a doctor, and I just finished my training and I'm 33.
Time well spent.
Time well spent. I wish it wasn't on interest on student loans, but yeah, time well spent.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's incredible. I mean, it's just such a journey. And I think anybody in medicine, it's like once you finally get there, you can't believe you've arrived because it's so much building that anticipation, building that preparation, serving in so many different capacities to try to figure out what you want to do. And you chose psychiatry.
I
So how
did.
did you decide that that was the field that, did you always want to do that? Or is that something that developed as you were going through the program?
It definitely was. So my dad works in mental health. He's not a psychiatrist, but I always grew up with him working in mental health. And
Okay.
I would say, like, actively, I don't want to do what he does. I don't want to work in mental health. But I think at the end of the day, like, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree because, we were always involved helping. He would maybe need help with, mowing this person's yard who, like, can't take care of their yard, or cleaning their house, or
Okay.
different kind of activities where I was growing up, and it kind of transformed me
Mhm.
into seeing, the needs that these people have,
Yeah.
and also just knowing the impact that you can have by just doing really simple things. But really,
Mhm.
what got me interested in it was my last year at Georgia Southern. I did a 5 years at Georgia Southern instead of 4. I did a victory lap because I had two
Yeah.
majors. I had two majors, and so I was finishing my second major. And in that last year, I worked as a behavioral health technician at a
Okay.
after school program with teenagers who struggled from substance abuse. And
Mhm.
so in that year, that's whenever I really got interested in mental health. And then, I went on, got accepted to medical school, went on to med school. And in the first couple of years, it's all the sciences that you're learning in the first
Mhm.
2 years. And so neuroscience and behavioral science were my two favorite sections that we learned. And naturally, whenever we moved to the clinical years, which are the third and fourth year, I was really drawn to working with the patients who had mental illness. And
Mhm.
oftentimes in the hospital, when we were like dividing up the patients, they would be like, okay, who wants this person with schizophrenia? And like, no one would raise their hand, but I'll take them, you know. And
I love it.
I always enjoyed it, and it was funny. I always had a good time with those patients. And um,
Mhm.
so that it kind of like, it was a natural fit.
Yeah, that's so special too, because I think it takes someone with a unique personality, somebody that isn't afraid to step out of their comfort zone into things that are uncomfortable. And I think you're the perfect person for that. And I know that you've probably learned a lot in the past 5 years, even more so being a patient. So tell me, okay, you got to medical school and
Mhm.
then tell me about when the stroke happened. Like where were you at that point in your career?
So I got through, I finished medical school, I
Okay.
graduated, and then I
Okay.
matched into residency in psychiatry.
Okay.
And so I matched into residency in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that residency, for people who don't really know, it's more years after medical school. We all have to
Right.
do it. Some people go to do family medicine, some people become a surgeon. I went to do psychiatry. This is where you do your
Mhm.
this is where you do your specialty training. And
Okay.
so I went to do psychiatry in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was in my first year as a resident, which is called your intern year.
Mhm.
And that you work like crazy. You work all over, I worked even as an emergency room doctor 1 month. I worked as an internal medicine doctor 1 month. They kind of have you
Wow.
all across the gambit. It's kind of just so you have your
Mhm.
exposure, um, and also kind of meeting the needs that the hospital has.
Yeah.
So intern years are really tough year for everyone. Because you're working a ton,
Mhm.
and not always in your specialty. But I made it all the way to the very end of my intern year. And I actually took my very first vacation day. I was super excited for it because we got 10 days a year. We got 10 days. And I had held
Yeah.
on to all 10 of those days. I was so excited. So I took my first vacation day and I went home to visit my mom in Savannah for Memorial Day weekend in
Yeah.
2019. And we were going to have a beach day. Everyone was coming to Savannah, like all of our family was. It was going to be a good long weekend. And I went to go work out that morning and I had a brain arteriovenous malformation rupture. I felt like I was working out and I felt the pop in my head. And I, like,
Mhm.
immediately, as soon as I felt the pop in my head, my left arm dropped. And
Mm.
in that moment, I was 28 years old.
Yeah.
I recognized that I was having a stroke, but I also was at the same time in shock. Like, am I really having a stroke right now?
Yeah.
This cannot be true. Like, especially, like, I just started working out and I wasn't doing a hardcore workout. I was doing like some
Right.
dumbbell rows, nothing
Yeah.
crazy. And I like kind of like it got really hot under my skull. I felt just like a really big
Mm.
heat sensation, and my left arm was still like completely paralyzed. I kind of looked around the gym, and I was kind of like, in that moment, making like microsecond decisions.
Right.
And I was looking, I was like, do I trust anyone to call 911, or what do I do? I
Right.
was partially in shock that I was in shock I was having a stroke, but I also
Yeah.
was like, this can't be real.
Yeah.
And I decided in that moment to just like bust it out the door and like run like out. And, I remember the
Mm.
YMCA girls being like, have a good day. Thanks for visiting. And I was like, yeah, thanks for having me. And,
About to collapse.
with my left arm hanging by my side, and
Oh
I
my
like I
gosh.
as I went out the doors, I called my mom. I knew she was like a mile down the road, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you've got to get to the YMCA. I'm having a stroke. I'll meet
Mm.
you at the car." And I was walking to my car, and as I was like quickly walking, my left leg then went paralyzed, ended up collapsing
Mm.
in the parking lot. And that's where my mom found me. And of course, she called 911. Thankfully, it was all happening very quickly. I remember whenever the ambulance got there, and I remember them like quickly throwing me in and calling a code stroke back to the hospital, which
Yeah.
ironically was where I trained as a med student.
Wow.
And the last thing I remember is just like the back door of the ambulance opening, and the ER doctor
Mhm.
who was evaluating me, I had worked with him as a student. And I remember him asking
Wow.
me to lift my left arm, and I can't. And then I blacked
Mhm.
out. That's the last thing I remember. I was in a medically
Mm.
induced coma for 2 weeks after that. They had to perform a life-saving surgery. They
Yeah.
told my family like I wouldn't live. They said I wouldn't make
Mhm.
it. And then miraculously, thank God, I had a really good neurosurgeon that was on call that day, and he saved my life. And
Mm.
in order to do so, he had to remove the right half of my skull, and he had to go in, stop the bleed. And thankfully, I mean, I've talked with him about this afterwards, of
Mhm.
course, and he said I'm very fortunate because it's kind of like if you think about your skull as being like a fixed container, like if you fill a bottle of water up, you can't keep filling it whenever the water's full and the
Right.
bottle will burst. Your skull kind of
Yeah.
works the same way. The bleeding had extensive bleeding inside my skull, and it was pushing my brain downwards. And if it had pushed any further, it would have crushed the center of my brain that controls breathing.
Mhm.
And he was like, "You were just like seconds away from dying."
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh my
and so
goodness.
that's just the beginning. And so then I I survived the surgery, of course, and which was a miracle in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I was placed into a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. And whenever I was taken out, they told my family, like, just so you know, like people who have this extensive brain damage, like they typically need to live in like assisted living facilities or have like all hands on deck, like at all times. Like
Right.
it's not going to be the same whenever he comes to, if he makes it. And so
Yeah.
um, thankfully that wasn't the case. And whenever I woke up, though, I was paralyzed like completely on the left side of my body, left face, left arm, and left leg. And that was something that I would have to be transferred to a neuro rehab hospital in Atlanta to
Mhm.
further work on, where I stayed for months on the
Yeah.
inpatient setting.
Mm. Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
and I still remember that day too because they called us, all of your friends. And I remember getting a call, I think from Caitlin or somebody, and she said, I don't think he's going to make it. He just had a
Mhm.
stroke. And I'm like thinking, this can't even be real. Like it
Yeah.
didn't feel like possible because you were so young. You were in such good shape. Like you
Mhm.
were just, I feel like at the peak of your health, and so
Yeah.
it just didn't make any sense. And I feel like that it was just no, like there's no way because you have so much potential. Like it's not time
Yeah.
yet. Like,
No, it was
and
so
oh,
unexpected, so
it's just so
unexpected.
crazy.
And everything, like I had worked so hard to get to that point in my life where I
Yes.
was finally a doctor.
Yes.
And like right as soon as everything in my life was like launching and kind of taking off, it was all like kind of just removed immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell me about your time at Shepherd. Like, what did you, because you were at Shepherd, right?
I
For
was.
that therapy time. And tell me about what you learned about being a patient instead of a doctor.
Oh gosh, I can go on for a long time about this, but I'll summarize it briefly. So from Savannah, I went from the neuro ICU there. The right half of my skull got sent to West Virginia, where it stayed in a freezer. And
Okay.
so it went there. That's apparently where they collect them, keep them for you until you're ready.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
until you're ready for it. And so I went to the Shepherd Center without the right half of my skull,
Okay.
and so that meant I had to wear a helmet at all times,
Hmm.
because there's nothing protecting your brain on the right half.
Yeah.
And so as a patient, it was really challenging because I've been told up front, like, you probably won't be able to move the left side of your body, like your
Hmm.
left arm, left leg, like that's kind of gone. The left face came back pretty quickly, which was
Okay.
good. Um, as a patient, it was really challenging because initially I was just in so much pain. I mean, they had sawed the right half of my skull off,
Right. Right.
and like it doesn't even
No big
sound pleasant.
deal.
Yeah, no big deal. So I was just in a lot of pain,
Yeah. I
and then
bet.
like I think emotional pain too, because like you said, I
Yeah.
had worked so hard to get in the best shape of my life, and I was so
Yes.
active, and so like I care more, I think, about physical activity than probably most people.
Hmm.
And like that's what was taken from me. Like, was I now have not just like half my body paralyzed being waist down, it's half like
Right.
straight down the middle. And so that was taken, and I had like at first, I remember not being able to move any of that side of my body, and that was really emotionally taxing. But
Yeah.
then slowly, like things started to kind of click. Like my left hand started like kind of. I could hold my breath, and I could focus on my hand, and I could think like just like trying to get my brain to make the connection, like move, like
Mm.
move. And like at
Yeah.
first, it would like be like little jumps. And this is of course also with the assistance of like people there at
Right.
the hospital who were helping me make this
Yeah.
happen. And I would sit there and like just think, and I would have to hold my breath so hard just to get like one finger to to
Mm.
move. And it was felt so long in the moment, but like eventually like the hand movement did start coming back. And then it's like, okay, like that's where I think hope kind of everything shifted. So up until that point, I
Mhm.
was really distraught that my whole life had just changed, and
Yeah.
like that I probably wouldn't move again. And then we start seeing these little micro progressions of like, oh, Kane's finger now moved 2 fingers, on his left hand. And it's
Yeah.
like a celebration. It was a celebration, every single accomplishment
Yeah.
in that recovery period. And so um, it went step by step, so slowly. And it continued to progress until I finally was able to walk with a lot of assistance. But
Mm.
as a patient, the difficulty in that, whenever I was training, I would go not into the patient's room and be like, "Hey, can we talk?" Blah blah blah, and it would be early in the
Mhm.
morning, of course, and they would scream at me, and I didn't quite understand. I understand now. Like it's like as a patient in the hospital, literally, someone is in your room every second. They are
Yeah.
always coming in and out and always making noise. Like you're not sleeping,
Hmm.
or if you do sleep, it is the worst quality sleep, and
Right.
you're also not in the hospital because you're like living your best life and doing well. You're like in a lot of
Right.
pain,
Right.
and it's miserable, and
Yeah.
it's not ideal. What you're going through a tough time already, and like the
Right.
hospital is not like the most therapeutic place to go through that. And so
No.
I have so much respect for the patient role because I didn't recognize. I knew it was hard. Like I can conceptualize before that it's
Sure.
difficult. That part was easy for me to get. I get that it's hard to be the patient,
Hmm.
but you don't really get it
Right.
until you go through it. Like you don't. And
Hmm.
it was just so incredibly challenging to
Yeah.
go through all of that. And there's no break. There's no break. Like
Right.
so it's like you can have like tough times and like but there's always people who are like, okay, like you can escape from it. There's no escape. It's in your face
Right.
24/7 for as long as it is. And for me, that acute period of time lasted for a half a year. I was in
Yeah.
the hospital. And so for half a year, I was dealing just constantly nonstop with all of this. And that
Mm.
was really difficult. So from a perspective of going from physician to patient, I have such a significant appreciation for the patient role
Yeah.
because it's so challenging. And it's changed the way I
Absolutely.
practice today.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And so during that time that you were at Shepherd, you were making progress, but how
Mhm.
did you keep yourself from being like completely defeated? Like on the bad days, what would you tell yourself? Did you have something that you told yourself? Was it your mom? Who kept you going? Because I just can't even imagine that.
In the initial period, for sure, I can't even take credit for it. It was my family, it was my friends. Like, I got a lot of love from everyone, just kind of bombarding me
Yeah.
with, like, uplifting messages. And like, even,
Mhm.
Survivor, I had interviewed to be on Survivor multiple times before that, and
Mhm.
even Survivors like reaching out and, like, doing all these things. And so, like, there were a lot of just positive messages that were coming
Yeah.
to me in those moments, and a lot of, as we got, like I said, we had those little moments where I'm starting to move my fingers, and then it's like I have this huge crowd of people supporting me, like, and
Mhm.
that's where I was like, okay, this is going to keep getting better, but it's up to
Yeah.
me to put in the work and do that, no matter how hard it
Right.
is. And I was like, I cannot live like this. I know
Right.
what I can and can't live like. And so I need to take this momentum that all these people are giving me and do something with it. And so I just kept pushing. And thankfully, the neuronal connections in my brain were not damaged. They were damaged, but not to the
Right.
extent that I couldn't make it happen, because some people have these and, they can't make that connection.
Right.
I'm thankful that I was. And so in those moments, journaling was super helpful.
Mhm.
Journaling was really good. I have a lot of journals in the other bedroom, just kind of like
That's
filled with
interesting.
accurate descriptions of how I was feeling. Like, if someone said something that was really hurtful, which happened
Um,
actually more often than not in the
mm,
hospital, I would write down those things, and I would write down how it made me feel in
mm.
that moment. And I would actually be like, oh, I would use those as fire to be like, I'm going to prove this person wrong. Like,
Yeah,
I was
that's
told
great.
multiple times, like, you will not go back to being a physician, to the point that they even were offering me like full term disability, and it would forgive my
Mm.
student loans from med school, but I would have to be on disability for life. And, at that point in time, there were not many people who believed that I could get back to being a physician. But I believed in myself. My family and
Yeah.
friends were like, he can do this. And that's all I needed.
Mhm.
And so I think I'm just really embracing the support system that you have. And thankfully, I have a really good support system.
Yeah, you do. You do. Your family's
Yeah.
awesome. I love them.
Yeah.
So tell me about the transition back to normal life. So after you were released from Shepherd, you still had quite a bit to kind of deal with in your life, even
Yes.
when you went back to, your residency. So
Yeah.
tell me about that process.
So whenever I left the hospital from Shepherd, whenever I say I was like walking, it was barely. I was using a walker, and
Hmm.
like, or I would use a wheelchair. Like, it would. I would, compared to where I was when the stroke happened, it was much better, but it was not light years better.
Yeah.
And so I went back kind of to the real world in pretty rough condition. And I don't think people, like, nothing really prepares you for that transition from being in the hospital where you have support 24/7, as annoying as it may
Hmm.
be. And you're with other people who are going through similar conditions. I was on a brain injury unit, so I was with a lot of other
Right.
people who had brain injuries, and you're with all this support specifically for that.
Hmm.
But then you go to the real world where, you walk outside, and, like, obviously I'm not walking well. I'm not moving well.
Right.
I had lost a significant amount of weight. I still, at that point in time, I had just had my skull reassembled months
Mhm.
after it had been taken out. And so I have these scars. Like, I looked terrible. And, you go out to the real world where, it's not there to help people with brain injuries. It's the real
Mhm.
world. And so it's a really rough transition, because I wasn't used to just like so many people looking at you and trying to be like, oh,
Mhm.
what happened to him? A lot of times people will look at you and think like, oh, oh, he broke his leg. It's easy to see a broken leg and be like, that's why they
Right.
can't walk well. For me, the injury is inside the brain. And so
Mhm.
people would stare and look, and I didn't realize just how often you would get asked like what
Mm.
happened. At first I was like, I don't know. It just kind of really was a big transition. Because
Yeah.
if I would see someone with a disability, I never really thought to ask them what went on. But
Right.
I can tell you, I get asked at least 6 to 8 times a day. I still get asked, even though I've made significant progress physically, and I
Right.
I embrace it with kindness. Honestly, a lot of times people think it's my ACL that was injured, and I take that as a
Mm.
compliment. I take it as a
Mhm.
big compliment, because if you think that I had my ACL injured and that's just what's up, then
Yeah.
I look really
You're
good.
doing great.
I'm
You
doing
do look
great. Yeah, if someone came up to me
good.
and was like, "You look like you had a major stroke. You look like you went through 4 brain surgeries. You had to be in the hospital for 6 months and, like, learn
Yeah.
how to walk again," I would probably feel pretty down. So
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy though what people say and do in situations and you're like, why did you think that that was even socially appropriate? But
Yeah,
I mean, I can see where it would just be really overstimulating too for you to just go from being where you're supported into like everybody's living their life and here
yeah.
you still are and you're trying to make sense of, okay, then how do I get back to that? Because I
Everyone's
know that's
living
where I want to be,
Yeah, everyone's
but
living their life and your life just got destroyed. And
right.
like, my sandcastle just got wiped out by the tsunami and I got to
Oh,
rebuild everything.
100%.
I
Yeah.
got to rebuild it. And so for me, I kind of looked at it as a challenge. I was like, okay, like, I was told I wouldn't get back to work, but I'm going to go against that. And
Hmm.
I'm going to take a test to see if I can go back, if I have the cognitive ability to be a
Yeah.
doctor. Because I was like, I want to finish residency. What else am I going to do with all the years of knowledge that I had? What am I going to do with it?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so I did. I took the test and I passed it, and I was going back to residency. But so a year
Mm,
late, I was out of residency for a year, and
okay.
I passed the test. I was good, and right before I was going to go back to residency, we did a brain scan, like a brain arteriogram, to check things out, make sure they look good. They kind of
Yeah.
monitor those for the first few years, and my
Mhm.
first one found more of the arteriovenous malformation, and so I had to have a fourth brain surgery to remove that. And so that was right before residency. And literally a month after that surgery, I went back. I started residency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm,
And so dealing with all of that is kind of weird because I don't know, like looking back at it, I don't know how I got through that. I really don't. And I
yeah,
don't know how I had a fourth brain surgery and then a month later was back in residency taking care of
me
patients.
neither. Yeah,
Um,
me neither.
but it did. It happened. I just knew I had to keep going forward. So
Yeah.
I went back and it was really hard to go back to residency. I don't think they didn't appreciate how difficult it was for me. I know they
Mhm.
didn't. Um I don't think it's possible for them to appreciate how hard it was,
Yeah.
but I know they didn't appreciate how hard it was for me to go back and change the role back from being the patient to the doctor, which was a
Mhm.
really difficult transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And tell me about like, did you feel like, okay, I'm fully equipped. I feel like I'm with it. Like,
Mhm.
I'm ready to rock and roll. And were the people around you supportive of that? Or were they nervous? How were their,
There
I guess, reactions to you coming back?
there's a huge stigma with brain injury, where it's like, oh, you've had a brain injury, like, and there's definitely reason why, but it's like, oh, you've had a brain injury, like, oh, the stigma is that people with brain injuries cannot perform high level jobs.
Hmm.
And I knew that stigma existed. It exists for a reason.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I passed my test. I went back. I
Right.
felt like my family was like, he's still the same person.
Right.
My friends were all like, this is still Kane. I was like,
Hmm.
I'm still myself. Like, I
Yeah.
feel cognitively with it. It's going to be a challenge like it was before. It was
Hmm.
challenging before my stroke. I was like, but
Right.
I know that I can do this. And I think that I can make an impact on healthcare. Having gone through what I did, I think I can make a
Hmm.
really significant impact on healthcare if I go back
Yeah.
and show them that I can do this. And so people were nervous. I'm not gonna lie. Like attending physicians that I worked with, the first one I worked with was just like she didn't say it, but she was absolutely terrified because this person with a major brain injury who just came
Yeah.
back and just had a brain surgery a month ago is now taking care of her
Hmm.
patients.
Yeah.
And so I could see it. They were supportive. Um,
Hmm.
there were certainly people who were really supportive and in my corner, and I am so thankful for. I'm thankful for that there were a lot of those people,
Yeah.
and that made it a lot easier than it could have been. But there were definitely several people who took a really strong opposite direction with that, and that is probably what made residency so difficult for me. Is
Yeah.
just having you have these connotations of people with a brain injury can't perform this job well. And then you have a few people who go really strongly against you and continue to
Mhm.
challenge you. And so I was like, I'm going to show them that I can do this. And I just took all the anger that they gave me because it wasn't just words, it was
Mhm.
actions that they did, the way that they handled certain situations with me. I took all that anger and I studied every single day. I would come home from work, I studied every single day. We took our practice
Mhm.
board exam, at the end of this last year. I scored in the top
Yeah.
16% of the United States. I just
Amazing.
I took this anger, and my patients loved
Yeah.
me. My patients
Yeah.
absolutely loved me.
Of
We
course.
have a great relationship. I took really good care of them. I knew that I could be a really phenomenal doctor, and I knew that I
Yeah.
could connect really closely with my patients, having gone through what I did. I'm very open about it. I can't
Yeah.
walk well because of my stroke, and so it's
Mhm.
obvious. It's not something I hide. I also, in residency, I guess we glossed over that too. In my second year of residency, I was actually working in a patient's room, and it was during COVID. And I remember, like, whenever COVID was really bad, I remember being in their room and asking them questions, and then all of a sudden getting really hot and sweaty. And I was thankfully, with the attending physician, and
Mhm.
I was like, I need to sit down on this patient's bed. I'm so sorry. That's weird. I'd never do
Right.
that. And this poor patient, because I sat down on her bed and I entered into a seizure. It was my first, I had a seizure
Mhm.
while I was in a coma, but that doesn't really count because it's kind
Right.
of expected in that situation. But this was my first
Mhm.
seizure, like, over a year and some change later. I had my first seizure. I entered actually into the worst kind of seizure you can have, which is
Mhm.
status epilepticus. And thankfully, the doctor was right there with me. She got nurses on board and got me we were in the hospital working. And thankfully, they got me into the ER really quickly.
Mm.
It was like 4 p.m. that day. I woke up at midnight intubated. And I remember trying to pull the stuff out because I went from, talking to a patient, and
Right.
next thing you know, it's midnight and I'm
Yeah.
like choking on this air pipe they've got down my throat. And
Mhm.
so if that was the only one, that would have been, okay. But that was whenever my diagnosis of epilepsy was confirmed. I had the status epilepticus seizure at the end of my second year. And then in my third year of residency, which is quite honestly one of the busiest years because we work in 7 different
Mhm.
clinics and 7 different locations,
Wow.
ended up hospitalized 5 more times and for seizures. And
Mhm.
so I was diagnosed with treatment resistant epilepsy. And that made things really difficult because after you've had a seizure, different states have different laws, but typically there's 6 months of no driving.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't drive. There was a year and a half chunk of time in residency that I couldn't drive. And so I was balancing not only all of this stuff that, like, residency, just the intensity of
Yeah.
residency for anyone who goes through it, learning all these different things, but also with my own life struggles of just like having had a stroke. Oh, being diagnosed with epilepsy stays lifelong. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And so being diagnosed with this chronic lifelong illness that has flares, where you end up in the hospital. And seizures are scary. I know that you know
Yes.
this, but they're very terrifying because it's not fun to be somewhere and then wake up somewhere different, or, to wake up
Right.
on the floor. I've woken up in the bathroom floor, different things. And so it's
Mm.
terrifying. And so I was
Yeah.
dealing with all of that as well. And then you throw on the different responsibilities of having to be in different clinics at different
Right.
locations. Like each half day was a different clinic location, and having to
Mhm.
navigate that with using Uber and Lyft, which are really expensive. And then, by the way, we're paid like pennies in residency. So you're just like accumulating debt after debt after debt. And it's like, I just have to get through this. I just have to
Yeah.
deal with this.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
because at that point, how could you give up? You're
Yeah,
like,
I was like,
"No,
I'm too far
I'm
in.
determined."
I was like, I'm going to prove these people wrong that have made me feel like I can't do it. I'm going to prove all of them
Yes.
wrong, but then prove to myself that I can do it. And that was
Yeah.
most important, is I can prove to myself I can do this and I can do it better than other people.
Yeah.
Even though they've not gone through what I've gone through.
So important. So important that, like, you felt that responsibility to yourself.
I
Like,
did.
"No, I can do this." Because I think that's when people really start to heal, is when they're determined within themselves that they can do it. There is possibility. Your life's not over. You don't have to
Mhm.
stop living. And I think that's something I really admired about you going through, specifically epilepsy, because I can relate to that. But
Yeah.
I think that was one of the things that I looked at you and I was like, I'm now in therapy because my child has epilepsy, and how does
Yeah.
people keep living and not just be totally paralyzed with fear? And so I think it's super admirable that regardless of what you've been through, that you're like, you know what? I'm not gonna let that stop what I'm capable of. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
let that get me to the point where I'm scared to do anything because of what could happen.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. Like, I think there's so much freedom in that.
There
And
is.
I've seen that in you, like being able to travel, and you just moved to Tampa
I
and
did,
living
yeah.
on the beach. I'm like, gosh, he deserves it. You deserve it. And it's just incredible that you have gotten to this point. I'm so proud of you.
It is incredible, and I think being open and honest about it. Some people have told me like, I wouldn't tell everyone you have epilepsy, and I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
well, there's two options that we truthfully have. I tell
Right.
you, or you find out.
Yeah.
So, which one do you want? Do you want a heads up? Because I have
Right.
an emergency medicine that I carry at
Yeah.
all times with me. I'm going
Right.
to tell you so that if it happens, you can give it to me so I don't end up
Yeah.
in the ICU again. And so, other people have been like, I wouldn't be as open about your brain injury as you have. I'm like, okay, well, it'd be great if it didn't affect my walking, but I don't walk perfectly because of it. And I'm not going to
Hmm.
lie. I had a
Hmm.
brain injury, and I'm also why? Like, I've passed my tests.
No.
I've done really well. Like, I'm doing really well in residency. I'm
Hmm.
doing really well with my patients. Like, why would I not use this as an opportunity to advocate for those people who have gone through what I've gone through to show that they can
Yes.
get back to their life again and really
Yeah.
not only just like survive, but thrive and do really well
Hmm.
and kind of fight the stigma that exists. And I think,
Yeah.
I've definitely pushed back against it. And
Hmm.
I'm happy I did because I'm back to where I'm
Me
at. And
too.
physically, I walk a lot faster than I did at first, and it's continuing to grow. It's still a difficulty, it's a challenge, but
Yeah.
compared to where I was, one day at a time, I'm doing much better. And I lost all my muscle mass, while I was in a
Hmm.
coma and in the hospital. But I
Right.
work out every day. I work out at 5 a.m. and then I go to work and
Hmm.
then I live my life and I do whatever I do the rest of the day. And
Mm.
just as if I did before my stroke, and I've put on most of my mass again, and
Yeah.
I like the challenge. I like the challenge that it's given me. Some
I
days
can.
I don't, but
Yeah, of course. Well, of course,
yeah,
there's always going
yeah.
to be some days, but I love that you still continue to just care for your body and
Mm.
keep pushing. Um, I mean, now all you have to do is get on Survivor, and you'll have met all of your goals.
And that goal, even I that was another thing that I had to come to terms with too. With epilepsy, some of the biggest triggers are not eating and not sleeping. And on Survivor, that's like pretty much the
Yeah,
premise of it. And so that was another thing that
yeah,
happened in that period of time is I had like these death of my dreams. It was a lifelong dream to
mm,
be on the show, but I
right.
found peace over this time with where I'm at because at the end of the day, you can't survive the day that you were going to die without
Mm,
paying something. Nothing is free. And for
wow.
me, my mobility and then epilepsy were the trade offs, if you will. If I'm like, hey, I want to live past May 24th, 2019. Okay, well, then you're going to have epilepsy and you're going to have difficulty moving. And that was it was a trade off that I did not instantaneously be like, okay, this makes sense.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
had to accept that. And so some of my, like you said, some of my
Mm,
lifelong dreams, like kind of died, but at the same time, other
mm,
ones were born. And so it's
yeah.
exciting to see exactly where that's going.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think that's something that John told me before when we talk about Harper and her future. And I get so upset because I'm just thinking, gosh, our lives are not going to be what I wanted them to be. We can't go here, we can't do this, whatever. And the thing that he's always told me is, Natalie, like, everybody has
Hmm.
limitations. Okay. So when you're looking at all the things that you can't do, you're going to stay in the defeated
Yes.
mindset of our life is done. All of our dreams have died.
All of them
Like
have died.
we we can't take her to Disney World to ride roller coasters. It's not going to work out. Like, but what can we do? And like what you said, there's beautiful things that you find in coming out of that place that you're now able to make peace with, which is
Hmm.
really a maturing in a sense, like
It
you
is.
are a totally different person now, but in a really incredible way. And
Yes.
so even though you have limitations, how can you turn that and make it into, actually, it's given me a gift,
Yes,
you
it
know?
has. And would I have one survivor? 100%. I would have one survivor. And
Absolutely.
and
Are you kidding me?
and
I think
so
this proves it.
right, I would have one survivor. And so I had to be like, okay, I can't do this because my body won't allow me to. But so many other dreams I never have dreamt prior. Like Survivor was my dream because at the time it made sense. I loved the show. It was great. But
Yeah.
then you have the death of it and you mourn the death of that for a period of time. But
Sure.
then you have really exciting new dreams enter and new opportunities and stuff that, is coming down the pipeline for me that, I won't talk about it now because you wait till it happens. And then you can say,
Right.
this is where I was redirected.
Yeah. That's really awesome. So, as we wrap things up, thank you so much for sharing and just being open and transparent with your struggles and then where you are now. And just, it's so inspiring. I think people can take so much away from your experience as a patient, but also now as a doctor
Yeah,
and seeing your first patient on
I
Monday.
am.
So,
I
that's
am.
just so incredible. I love it. You've arrived,
I've
you've made
made
it.
it. I've made
Um,
it.
that's so cool. So I always ask all of my guests, how have you felt seen recently? So what's one way that you've felt seen?
So one way that I have felt seen, because a lot of times as residents we didn't feel seen,
Mm,
appreciated, and so the ways that we kind of navigated that with making sure we felt seen was whenever I went out to eat with my friends, we would always say, "What's like something like
mhm,
what are some wins that's going on in your life?" Like it's
mm,
kind of a moment where you can brag, and it's not like viewed as bragging. It's kind of just like
yeah.
what are these moments, what are the good things happening in your life, what do you have going on that like you want to
Yes.
say is like a win. And so for me, the way I felt seeing this, like
Hmm.
with my friends, they allow for this opportunity and we all are able to
Hmm.
talk about the things that are going on in our lives and feel like the wins that are happening and just supporting each other through that and being like they're like like that is awesome, that is so exciting, like them being just as excited as you are for what's
Yeah.
happening in your life. And so
Hmm.
being seen, I guess, in that way. Of course, I graduated
Yeah.
residency, and my family and friends were just like so supportive and so excited because they people know the struggle that it was for me to get through where I got
Yeah.
to, and so they made me feel seen in the sense of like they know how hard it was for me. They've seen the insides and outs of the whole process and struggle,
Yeah.
and appreciated me. And so a lot of that through there. And then one last thing I would just leave people with is like, you can make yourself feel seen too, whether you use it on social media or not. And you can be open about these challenges. You can be open about the wins as well. But just be transparent
Hmm.
and honest. A lot of times people on social media only see the wins of other people. But as
Mm.
I've gone throughout this, I kind of was open about the downs. I've been open about the ups and just trying to be open about the whole process and just knowing that
Yeah.
everyone is going to have the downs and the ups. And sometimes it's just your turn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it is your turn, and I'm so thankful that you're here. I'm so thankful you're alive and that you're thriving, and that we get to be friends and get to still reconnect from time to time. So,
I am
thank you
too.
so much again. Yeah, it's been so great, and thank you for just being here and dealing with my internet issues,
Yeah.
and the trying to get together 3 different times, but
Right. We made
we
it
did it.
happen. We
So
did it. Happy late birthday too.
I know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So that's another episode of the IC podcast, and another episode will be released next Friday. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.